Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here. You have a beautiful city, beautiful country. I love it. Jason, thank you so much for starting the day off with America's finest export, Vanilla Ice. We're so proud of them there. If you want to keep them here, you can. My name is Jon. Connect with me on the interwebs and talk with me tonight at the local pub. I heard Mr. Norris is actually buying it out, so show up there. He's looking at me like, get back on your plane. Yes, it's true. I speak funny. Truth is, I'm not from around here. I am from Minnesota. Does everybody know where Minnesota is? Does anybody? I know a few of you have been there, a couple of us. Okay, it's like right in the middle of the United States, and it's practically in Canada. It's not actually on the Canadian border. It's like the Siberia of America, if you will. So it's probably around 3:45 a.m. my time, so please excuse any Freudian slips or anything that will come this way. I consider myself a designer. They focus on a few disciplines, okay? So I think we have strengths and weaknesses as designers. My strengths just happen to lie in information architecture and front-end development and code. I've been called the unicorn. Actually, I was called it last night. And that I do design and with information, and I do designery things, and I do usability. And I use code to build stuff, but that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You know, if I was a unicorn, my dad would be a horse, and my mom would be a narwhal, and I would have a horn sticking out of my head right now, which I don't. I'm human, and my parents are humans. So let's stick with designer. I'm less, I own a consultancy called Nice UX. Simple CMMS is a product that we own, that we distribute. You can ask me what that extra M in the middle actually is. It's not CMS like you know. And I create all the curriculum, and I run a couple UX classes at a couple colleges. And I'm more so less interested in the title that I have or the title that I hold at any particular company or role that I fit into. I want to more so understand how I can contribute to creating something that helps someone enjoy life a little bit better, right? How we can contribute to that end goal. Or how, even better, as a designer, how can I contribute to make that journey along the way more enjoyable? And as designers, I think that's what we care about the most, is that journey. Yes, I love seeing when I create something in the UI and it removes a source of friction or something that's frustrating for someone. I remember I always talk about the time that I added a single checkbox to this list of items, and you put a button at the top that you can affect multiple items in that row, where they traditionally had to go through and go individually line by line. And this woman that does this day by day and works in this particular application day by day, she was near tears, and she ran up and gave me a hug because I put those checkboxes in there, and it was wonderful. But I also love to get outside of the web when I start talking about experience design, because it affects everything outside of the web as well. So right now I'll tell you a story about the most terrifying moment, near-death experience of my life. Okay, it was terrifying. Okay, so picture this. Now, you're going to get an office in San Francisco. You're not familiar with San Francisco, but you're very excited, and your friend says, okay, I have this wonderful place that you got to check out, so you go check it out. Look at a map. Okay, I'm pretty confident in driving around cities I don't know, especially you see there's a couple different grids going on here. North, south, east, and west. It kind of mixes in the middle right there. But then when I look at it, I look at San Francisco and I think, my God, what happened here? Who did that? Does that city planner still have a job? I looked at London before I came here too. Anyway, so I look at my map, I look at the location, and it looks like a pretty straight shot. I can get there pretty easily. But actually, when I look at it a little bit closer, oh, for heaven's sake, my God, I do have to go through that. So I do the thing with Google Maps, reroute, just to reroute a little bit, make it a little bit easier for myself. Perfect. Looks like a straighter shot, easier to go through. So I'm fairly confident right now that I can get there. Although, so I don't have to do any more research on how to get to where I'm going anymore. So I head out, I start driving. Now that I know that San Francisco has a lot of intersections, spaghetti intersection junctions that are like this, or like this, or even worse, this. Okay? This is just getting off the freeway. Okay? I didn't know that going into it. I thought I still had this straight shot. So I get off of my exit, and in the throes of hell, the great state of California and the city of San Francisco decides that after you get off a freeway and you encounter one of these, that in a split second with all the California drivers just whizzing by you, confident in where they're going, you're going to be presented, within a split second, you have to make a decision and be presented with this sign. Okay. Now those turn-by-turn directions from Google Maps, they don't do anything for you, okay? Although I do appreciate Google's effort to give me the option to select the nice British lady voice on my turn-by-turn directions. It's wonderful and all. But now I have to decide, okay, where do I turn left? How do I turn left here? Okay, where am I going? And not only that, but you are encountered with other things throughout your drive, like terrain like this. This is not optical illusion. There are 45-degree angle roads in San Francisco. And you're driving around, you're driving like this, or you're standing down, you're seriously looking down and you're driving like that. It's terrifying. And you have to parallel park on that. I mean, you can't do it. Now, when you finally park, you go and you check a sign. There's signs telling you where you can and can't park, right? You see one of the signs, and this is what you're presented with, okay? Can anybody tell me when you can park here? I see a lot of red. I don't know, I'll save you a little time and tell you when you can park here, which is never, okay? So don't even try parking here because you're gonna get a ticket or you're gonna get towed regardless. Now, I actually wish I had Nikki Celiatang navigating the car with me because she created this for the city of Los Angeles and a study to put all that ugly information into a context that I can understand in a format that's easier to read. Andrew Hinton's book actually has this in there, and Los Angeles just started putting these signs where traditionally had those totem pole of signs. And she used design to make sense of this ugly, ugly world, this ugly mess of information that you are presented with that you're not ready for when you get there. So naturally, after finally and safely arriving at the place that I was looking at, I began questioning what went wrong. And not in my preparation, right? This is not my fault that I didn't prepare of where I was going. So I did what any warm-blooded American would do. I blamed someone else. I questioned Google, okay? What are they doing on the maps team anyway? Should there have been some sort of heads up that my life was going to get extremely difficult along this drive? And I found this article on The Atlantic by Alexis Madrigal, and she interviewed the senior product manager at Google Maps. And when she talked about how Google went about designing their maps, and Alexis said, if you look at the offline world and the real world in which we live, the information is not entirely online, okay? Increasingly, as we go about our lives, we're trying to bridge the gap between what we see in the real world and online and try to make that decision on the fly. So how do you go about making a map? How do they make a map? So they start with the baseline information that they have. In Google Maps, they started with the United States, the Tiger Census Bureau Tiger data set. Okay, and globally, they use other data sources, right? But you start with that base data set and all these different sources of information. You compile it together, you do a little bit of engineering on that data so it's all structured correctly and it's spit out correctly. And then all those different parts are, what comes out at the other end is something that's better than the sum of all the parts, right? So Now at Google, at Google Maps, they do a lot of what he calls hand massaging the data. Okay. Because when you take this and you overlay it on satellite imagery, you get something like this. Now, when you look at it, there are a couple things that are a bit off. There's intersections on top of buildings. There's roads where there are no roads. They completely missed roads. And a road is zigzagging. It's kind of, it's not exactly how you would experience when you go into the real world. So they have two forms of human intervention to massage that data, which is a Google streetcar. And you get the street view, and it's wonderful, and you can see all the different signs that have the 5 different splits for driving. I always do the street view before I drive in certain areas now. And then they have this building in Bangalore, India, where they have thousands of people that hand massage this data. So they go square mile by square mile across the world, find these nuances, and then adjust the data. Now, the streetcar actually, when it's driving on these roads, it's not only taking pictures, like as you'd expect, but it's actually finding out exactly where that car is and what is a drivable road, and what is not a drivable road. So you can actually compile that data together, have thousands of humans massaging this data, so you can get something like this. That's a little bit more meaningful for us. Okay? But like you said, there's much more information we consume. We'd like to mitigate the risk of running into different situations. And Street View, you see a lot of these situations where you have those signs, or you see what the sign actually looks like, and on Google Maps it says exit 204. But it's actually, this is the sign that I'm interested in. This is the information I need. Oh, that's the sign, yes, this is my exit, right? Especially when you have intersections like this, and you see this kind of mess. It's nuts. Now, we're all familiar, okay, that particular journey was incredibly stressful and difficult. And there's a lot of information that I could have done on my part to figure out where I was going to go. And we're all kind of familiar with these kind of situations, right? We're all familiar with both in our life and in our jobs and like user experience design. Joshua Porter has a wonderful representation of these difficult situations that he actually calls friction. Now, or another way to say friction is cognitive load, okay? Is everybody familiar with the cognitive psychology theory of cognitive load? Okay. So very briefly, okay. So cognitive load is the amount of working memory required to achieve a goal, okay? The principle forms the basis of Steve Krug's book, Don't Make Me Think. The less I have to think about the less I have to think about achieving a goal, the more likely I'm going to achieve it. In other words, we have only so much capacity in our little human heads to process and consume and interpret all this information that we come across and make a decision. And as you know, as for humans, capacity is a sliding scale sometimes. Now we talk about ourselves as designers, we talk through various aspects of extraneous cognitive load, the extraneous part of it. The load we're placing on users, or how much more difficult it's going to be for someone to complete their task when we use a Slack box versus a radio button, set of radio buttons, right? But what I find remarkable is that we talk a lot within the context of the end goal of the project, so the project or what people are going to see at the end. But you see a lot of teams struggle with that journey along the way. So producing ridiculous amounts of documentation just to present it and do this big reveal and this ta-da moment at the end, and the client tears it apart, right? And not really understanding what went into it or the decisions that were made. So we need to really start thinking about the cognitive load or that friction throughout our process and in the methods of communicating design. And I think that's a lot of what collaboration is about. And that's a lot of what flexible documentation, when I say flexible documentation, it's what you'd expect. You grab the little corner of the browser and it's flexible and all that kind of stuff with responsive design. But but it's much more than that. It's about being efficient and effectively communicating, effectively delivering experiences along the way. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about. I'll cover a couple different aspects of flexible documentation and how I've approached and found efficiencies or been able to effectively communicate along those different points of friction along the process. And this is just ways that have worked for me, and it's not in every situation, but in a couple different areas. So when we start researching content, for example, how do we make our content modeling a little bit more portable? Okay, so let's take Rdio, for example. Anyone still using Rdio? Oh, just me. Okay. Everyone's on Spotify, Pandora. Now, I love music. Now, I'm happy, and I love these applications that take all this information that they know about me, that I love these songs or these artists, and then it compiles this radio station tailored specifically for me through this little algorithm that they come up with. It's really remarkable. I love it. Now, a lot of content models for information architects, what we produce displays those basic content types and relationships, right? This is from Rachel Lovinger's article on Alyssa Part about content modeling. It's just a representation, but I think it applies actually to this particular situation about music. Another way to do it really easily, right, is just a bulleted list. It's so easy for a content model, for someone to understand. Actually, your client probably already knows this, right? They already know this is my content. Yeah, okay, yeah, I know that there's songs and title time, explicit content for songs, whatever. But at this point, if it makes sense for me and the team, I actually want to change the conversation. I just don't want to give the client like some abstraction from what that content model is and just boxes and arrows. So what I'll do is, and I don't do too much, I kind of have the same hierarchical structure, but I'll give them, okay, this is what we're going to call this thing. This is our controlled vocabulary. Here's artist. We have albums. We have cover art. You know, we have genres. Is it explicit content or not? But then I'm also giving them the actual content that they're going to see or that they use, right? Designing around your real content is incredibly important. But then they start getting introduced to like things like Boolean values, true, false, yes, no. Now, there's a lot more information than just albums, cover art, songs that go into a product and how we use it and how we use and massage that data that we use to serve up all these different things. So for responsive design, we have different sizes of images. They need to know that. They need to know that there's going to be multiple images they're going to be able to serve up at any given device or size so that they can say, oh, okay, well, we actually prefer to have a small one at this size or at the large one, we have this art in there. Now, what I can do as a team, and actually what this is, and you're like, yeah, he's talking about code, and that's great. It looks like code. Well, actually, it kind of turns into that. But what it really is, it's just simply JavaScript. Okay, I don't get too fancy with all the code, but it's really easy to understand when you look at this. There's hierarchy there. I can see that I can have multiple artists, and now this is what is called JSON, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, but it's just like XML. It's just a content delivery method. But now, as a product team, we can say, for this particular content model, we can serve this particular thing to the phone, okay? This to our Wi-Fi-enabled toaster. This to our little small devices. This to my car and my laptop. And using JSON for our content model. It gives us a flexible, structured, shareable information set that we can distribute to different environments. Okay, funny, I think I've heard that somewhere. I don't know. Of course, this can be reused later for prototyping, and we'll come back to this. Or actually, we can use this to start the engineering team with something a little less ambiguous. This is exactly how we want our data to be structured. Because no one wants engineers thinking, right? Is there any engineers in the room? I should have probably asked that first. No? Okay, kind of. Okay, good. Okay, now let's start, after we understand our users, we just understand the business, we understand our content that we're going to be designing around. Now we have to collaborate. We have to effectively get from point A to point B and get to the end of that concept, get to what that concept's going to be together as a team without completely destroying the usability of it or taking everything out that we worked so hard to put in there. So let's talk about idea generation. So we want to start by facilitating a workshop. Okay, this and generates as many ideas as possible. The idea is to get so many ideas out there as possible. This is diverging. This is the divergence of the design process. The whole idea is that we want to get as many ideas from various perspectives in order to get others invested in the process, and they feel invested in that design process when they're part of that collaborative effort. And you do these design sketches with people, and you start by talking about like blue sky scenarios, or here's thoughts on what it's going to be, assumptions or features that potentially could be in there. Or maybe we use Todd Zaki-Warfel's 685 workshop. That was in the book Game Storming as well. Where everybody produces 6 to 8 sketches in 5 minutes. So it gives you the idea of how much fidelity we're working with. Now each person presents, briefly critique, and repeat. Right? Now we got to make decisions and realize design against constraints. So let's craft the details in sketch form and informally present to the team members individually. So now we created all this work, and everybody's kind of understanding the direction of where it's heading. Now when we start getting into UI components and different individual UI components, I'll take it to individuals of the team that were in that collaborative session before. Now they feel like all these different things that I'm bringing to just them, that this is their chance. This is their chance to influence. But really, you're just doing this to all the different team members. And so that when we get into the room at a later time and we have this like wireframe session, or we look at what the end goal is going to be, everybody's like, yeah, that's mine. That's going to I had an influence on all of that. This influences all flows and transitions. Now, when we get into like scalable, like page structure, like the information, the wireframes that you traditionally start looking at, and you say, we have this concept, we have this content. Now we have to start getting real with like a tool, right? Now, someone I've known for a while and looked up to throughout my career, Dan Brown, owner of a little shop called 8 Shops out in Washington, D.C., said this about tools. So I'm always puzzled by designers who are dogmatic about their documentation formats, their tools, and techniques. Designers need to build a toolbox. So, Jason talked about this toolbox, and I think you hear a recurring theme. It's like we have this toolbox to approach any different type of situation, any different type of content set, different client, and different situation that once you understand what you're dealing with, you really calibrate yourself to that situation. Emily Schwartzman of Cooper has this nice little write-up and ranking of these tools from her perspective, right? And she ranks them on like speed to create, amount of fidelity you can get in there, does it support mobile and touch, how complex can you get the interactions. But every degree of abstraction away from the product in its finalized state carries that cognitive cost. Okay? So I still have to interpret how that's going to work. And still, at the end of the day, is it actually working like the way I wanted it to work? And even more so if that designer doesn't even understand the constraints or possibilities of maybe the front-end code or the ability of the engineers that you're working with. So what I like to do right from those sketch form is start to get into code. Now I use tools like Bootstrap, and it's really easy for me now to do this and get into the browser. It makes prototyping pretty much as easy as copy and paste, right? You want a button, there you go. Just copy and paste it in there. You can actually use these starter templates too if you really wanted to. Now we can take what are HTML, our structural IA, visual design, and that CSS, interaction design for just simple behavioral things with JavaScript, and that content model, and we can pull together the concepts like source ordering and see actually how things break up in the browser. So I mean, I know Acture and InVision, you can do some of these things, and they're great tools. You know, in a pinch and different situations, I'll use them. They're awesome. But there's nothing in my perspective that compares to seeing it actually working. Or we could do like subtle interactions, say, how does it actually work? How many milliseconds does a particular transition take? So when I click on this button, okay, there's going to be a little wait time, so we have a progress indicator, all this kind of good stuff. But some other things are immediate. And now we can actually layer on top those annotations, so we can say, okay, for some people, you can say, okay, well, here's some annotations to kind of put a little bit more context around it. Now we have our wireframes, we have our content meta, all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about efficient visual design creation and effective feedback. And this is, I think, the most important part as we go through the process. I mean, you have to have that strategy. You have to have that collaborative nature as well. But we also have to have this vocabulary of how we talk to each other and provide an effective feedback loop to each other. And there's no more so a divide between this vocabulary, this way of collaborating, than designers and developers, right? And it's just nuts that we have to have a PSD for every single screen that we use. That's just nuts. So I want to use sort of a case study of a project that I had worked on. Now, here's some wireframes. Actually, these are expertly crafted by Mr. Mike Atherton. If I didn't say it before, thank you very much. This is very efficient, lightweight, just created sketches, okay? And I don't know if it was a necessity of the actual project and the situation that we were in, but I think it was wonderful. It told me exactly the story what I needed to build. Steve Fisher created the visual design. All he did for visual design was create this style guide, but then what he did for any other design was create code. He wrote code. And he created this like static template of the website. Now, we had to integrate that with Drupal, okay? So what that code was, it was an abstraction from what it actually was going to be. But once we integrated that code, we noticed a couple differences. So the design didn't match what was coming out the other end after we put it into Drupal, right? So how do we talk about this? And this wasn't feedback from Mike or Steven either, but some of the feedback came back to me. I was the front-end developer on this, where it was like, there's too much spacing here. The text isn't bold, it's the wrong typeface. Too much spacing, not enough leading, right? Leading, it's a very print-focused term. The text is too big. It's very ambiguous feedback that I was dealing with. So if I change something, oh, it's too big, okay, I'll make it smaller, right? But then you come back another time, and you're wasting all this time. Okay, I made it smaller. No, that's too small. No, that's not small enough. Well, now let's make it smaller, but make it a little bit more bolder. Well, how bold? Okay, so look familiar? I mean, I think you get this situation. What we need to do in 2015 and beyond is be able to have a controlled vocabulary, how we talk to each other. And there's wonderful tools to do that. And this is just one of them that you can use. So in Chrome, you can just right-click on an element within the screen, and it brings up this menu that says, at the very bottom, Inspect Element. And it brings up this little tool at the bottom, and it shows you all the HTML and the styles that were used. Okay, so now instead of, and these tools, they're wonderful. You can even do like designery things like choose a color, and it gives you the color selector, right? So you don't have to be too much of a code nerd. It shows you the amount of images or the weight of all the images that you're serving up. So maybe we can choose a little bit smaller images. Or even choosing like, okay, we can choose specific devices in their orientation and network throttling. So you want to see something on 2G? Well, you can see how slow that page actually loads. So it turned our feedback into something that was more ambiguous to something like this, where it was like, okay, we reduce the line height to 1.25 em. Well, as a developer, I know exactly what that means. And I know exactly for this particular class or for this element, change it to this. Okay, I can do that. Okay, a tool's a tool, right? All your teams are different than teams I've worked on, or maybe they're the same. All the different clients that you work with are very different. All the different content sets, all the different design situations that you work with are different. And a tool's a tool. But I think what you really have to ask yourself, right, is how can you make your team, how can you make that journey that you work on as a team, how do you collaborate, how do you make that more enjoyable, okay? Thank you very much.